Back in July of 2022, on International Non-Binary Day, we sent out an email to everyone on our mailing list with a very simple message, saying, at Temple Beth Shalom, we affirm and celebrate the visibility, joy, and lived experiences of members of the non-binary community. And non-binary people are people who identify neither as male nor female, or at least not as men or women exclusively. And so we sent out that simple message to show that we see non-binary people and we affirm their existence, that we affirm who they are as valid, as real. And we received a number of emails from our members thanking us for sending this out. And we also got 2 emails from non-members, one of whom wrote, and you wonder why there's anti-Semitism, as though somehow affirming non-binary people causes anti-Semitism, and that must be the reason for anti-Semitism over the last 2,000 years. Another person, non-member, wrote to us to say, you don't even know Torah, you're a disgrace. That one was particularly interesting for me. They actually quoted from Genesis chapter 1, male and female, he created them, and said this is proof that there are only 2 genders, male and female, and that we are a disgrace for not knowing Torah. But what's interesting is our Jewish tradition is far more nuanced when it comes to gender. For example, Radak, the medieval philosopher, notices, as other commentators do, that there is only one being at that point. That being is Adam, the earthling. And we very often talk about Adam in context of Adam and Eve, which comes later. But Adam, the original earth being who comes from the Adamah, is male and female together. And the rabbis discuss in Talmud, is this an androgynous being? Is it male and female side by side? Is it male and female back to back? Or is it one androgynous, as they call it, being? So Radak, the medieval commentator, says God created Adam as both male and female. Bereshit Rabbah, the Midrash, in chapter 8, says, Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Eliezer says, in the hour when the Holy Blessed One created the first human being, God created Adam as an androgynous being. This shows, as well as many other texts, countless texts that I could share with you, that Jewish understanding of gender is far more nuanced. However, the biblical and rabbinic tendency was always to talk in a polar gender spectrum. You are either male or female. And where they saw exceptions, the tumtum, the ilonit, the androgynous, the saris, all these different kinds of individual who they heard about, they were aware that they didn't fall into a simplistic male or female gender binary. They could have turned around, particularly the rabbis of Mishnah and Talmud, they could have turned around and said, look, our biblical source text shows us it's not so simple as male and female only. Therefore, we're going to notice and pay attention to these other gender categories. Instead, probably because gender was so strongly connected with power and that masculine dominated the feminine, they took each of these separate gender categories and basically forced them into a binary model. These categories of the saris, ilonit, tumtum, androgynous, and others became the exceptions that proved the rule, instead of what could have been, which is the exceptions that show that the rule doesn't stand. And so in Talmud, instead of saying these are neither male nor female, the rabbis turned around and said, in which circumstances should this category be classed as male, and in which category should this be classed as female? And I do understand, especially because I used to be there, I do understand how many people assume gender and biological sex are the same, and assume that you are either born only male or female. and that is just how things are around the world. But in fact, as we shared in our Tikkun Leil Shavuot on Tuesday, and I must add congratulations to Cindy for being our cheesecake competition winner this year. As we saw in the first discussion in our Tikkun Leil Shavuot on Tuesday, there are innumerable societies around the world that actually hold a gender spectrum that is far more nuanced than simply men or women. Indeed, some cultures have a third gender, some have more, some have an inner gender and an outer gender. The outer gender is that which is expressed biologically, in other words, by looking at the body. The inner gender is how a person feels. And of course, we need to be clear, especially as we look at the intersex community, that there are in fact there's no proof that body proves gender. By which I mean that there are very many people born each year with bodies that don't indicate either one gender or another. And so the doctors and family have to come together to decide which gender this child will be raised. I share all of this because I think it's really important. It's important for us as a community in terms of not just the way that we interpret our tradition and the assumptions that we make, or at least the assumptions that non-member made before we removed them from our mailing list, but rather we need to look at what does it mean to be inclusive. There's a really interesting statistic that I want to share. Among baby boomers, that's people born between 1946 and 1964, currently 2.3% identify as queer as part of the LGBTQ plus community. Among Generation X, that's people born from 1965 to 1980, that increases to 4.5% identifying as part of the LGBTQ plus community. Amongst millennials, people born between 1981 and 1996, that rises to 10%. And amongst Generation Z, that's people born between 1997 and 2012, over 22% identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. And those people are talking to us in a very loud and very clear voice and saying it's not enough to say you're inclusive, you have to show that you're inclusive. And so we gathered together based on a number of different pieces of feedback from members of the LGBTQ plus community, from Jews of color, from visitors and so on. We gathered together a racial equity, diversity and inclusion group, which met and made some recommendations. And one of them that's particularly appropriate here is the recommendation that Temple Beth Shalom look at gendered language in prayer, in teaching materials, in the forms that we send out, and in Torah, and replace them with non-gendered language where possible. It's really interesting because, of course, Hebrew is a gendered language. And this was the first session that we had on Tuesday evening at our Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Because Hebrew is a gendered language, the Jewish community has always tended to view gender really simplistically, either male or female. English is not a gendered language, although the history of how English was used tended to be very gendered. So even people would talk about mankind, for example, when they mean everyone. But mankind is quite specifically the kind of person who is like a man. So the male became normative. And so there are countless examples throughout recent history where we've changed our language to be more gender inclusive. Can we do that within the context of Judaism? Do we need to replace everything that is gendered with non-gendered terms? Or, as we discussed on Tuesday, do we need to add the option of non-gendered terms? Let's take an example. Bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. Bar mitzvah, Aramaic, son of the commandment. Bat mitzvah, daughter of the commandment. But what if, as a number of young adults in our community do, what if they identify neither as male or female? Which ceremony do they have? Do they call it a bar mitzvah? Do they call it a bat mitzvah? There's been a number of people around the world who've been working on non-binary Hebrew, and they've come up with the suggestion of bet mitzvah. A bet mitzvah combines bat mitzvah and bar mitzvah in a non-gendered term. And so the question is, do we replace all gendered terms and say everyone has a bet mitzvah? Or do we give the option for our young adults to say you can have a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah, or a bet mitzvah? And what's interesting is a suggestion from one of the young people in our community on Tuesday was that second perspective. Not to replace non-gendered terms, but to provide an opportunity for choice. That becomes more challenging, though, when it comes to our prayers, because Hebrew as a language of prayer is definitely gendered. And so the same person suggested maybe what we could do is have some of our prayers in Hebrew and some of our prayers in English, which we already do, but maybe addressing a different balance to help address a gender differential. The point of raising all this is that we're starting to really seriously look at this, because it's really important to me personally and professionally. I think it's really important to show that we are as inclusive as possible, that we look as a community, especially during Pride Month, we look at all the gendered assumptions in our community, from the way the building is structured and the way certain rooms may be gendered, to the language that we use in our membership forms, in our prayer, in our ritual, and so on. And so I want to share to members of the LGBTQ plus community, particularly during Pride Month. We see you, we hear you, and we are doing everything that we can to show how much we value you. And we really do value you for who you are and for what you bring to our community. When we changed the community tagline, "Come as you are," we really meant it. But that was also a challenge for us as a community, that we had to create a space where people could come as they are and feel included and safe. And so this Pride Month, I want to share how important this is to me and to us as a community, and to show that we're working on it, we're thinking about it, we're talking about it, as we did on Tuesday at our Tikkun Leil Shavuot. And as this conversation becomes larger, we hope to bring in as many people as possible, because I think it is an essential conversation. If for no other reason, then it shows everyone that our community, our tradition, is far more nuanced on the concept of gender than people may have originally assumed. So I wish you happy Pride Month, and you'll be hearing more about this in other pre-Shabbat messages to come. I invite you to join us for our evening service this evening. It's going to be myself and Fred leading the service. Fred will be accompanying as I lead the service. And in coming weeks, I'll be sharing with you as well about the other individuals who are going to help lead services as we move forward into the future. Tomorrow's Torah study is a challenging one. It's the ritual of the sota, the woman suspected of adultery. And I, in my masculine way, will be sharing only female commentaries. And I think it's really important to only share female commentaries on this ritual. We've heard enough of the male commentaries trying to justify the ritual. Now we hear from female commentaries, some of which are extremely critical of the ritual, some of which are really supportive. And I encourage you to join us for that, as well as for our Shabbat Shacharit service as well. And I want to share just a little something about our Shabbat Shacharit service before I close, which is we've started to get more and more people back to Saturday morning services, which is wonderful for me. I prefer to only bring out a Torah scroll when we have a minyan, when we have 10 people for Shabbat morning. In our evening service, we can easily get 50, 60, 70, 80 or more people in the service. And that's wonderful. In the morning service, not as many. And we sometimes have only 2 or 3 people missing for a minyan. So if you're able to join us, you'll be able, on a Saturday morning, we'll be able to bring out the Torah scroll. We just need a few more people to come to really be able to hear Torah being read, to see it being read, to gather around the scroll as it's being read. So if you're available on Saturday morning, I do encourage you, please join us to help us not just read from Torah, but also to help, for example, support those who are mourning, who need a minyan to say Kaddish as well. So I wish you a happy Pride Month, and I reiterate to the members of the LGBTQ plus community, especially those who are members of Temple Beth Shalom, we see you, we hear you, we value you, and we want to hear from you so that we can continue to develop our community so that everyone may come as they are. I wish you Shabbat Shalom.